A human diplomat made the most powerful alien sovereign across the stars laugh. The glassy towers of Nova Lisara shimmered beneath a twilight sky, catching the rays of twin setting moons. In the diplomatic skimmer, Daniel Rowan tugged at the stiff collar of his formal jacket, while his assistant, Lila Chen, scowled over her hollow slate. The hum of the skimmer's engines was the only sound between them, save for the soft tap of Lila's stylus against the glass. "If you keep fidgeting, you'll ruin the impression," she whispered, shooting him a look sharp enough to slice through his nerves. Daniel tried to grin, though his fingers wouldn't still. "Sorry, it's just, I'm about to meet the alien sovereign who could erase humanity with a word." Lila's eyes narrowed, her voice low but fierce. "You're not here to beg or threaten. You're here because you're genuine. Show them that." The diplomatic skimmer dipped through swirling currents of luminescent cloud. As they broke through the last veil of mist, Nova Lisara's heart revealed itself. The citadel, a breathtaking marvel of living glass and obsidian. The central tower pulsed with blue-white light, surrounded by sentinels, tall, athletic figures in mirrored armor, their electric blue fur streaked in black, sapphire eyes watchful and unblinking, long fox-like ears twitching with anticipation. The skimmer settled onto a suspended platform, its doors side open to reveal Commander Zev Aaron, the Sovereign's chief guard. Zev's presence was both magnetic and intimidating, broad shoulders sheathed in ceremonial armor, the glint of his fur like lightning beneath storm clouds. His voice echoed, resonant and commanding. "The Sovereign is waiting. Do not stray from my path." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. Lila straightened his collar, her fingers lingering for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Remember what I said. Genuine." They stepped into the citadel, following Zev through corridors of living glass. Light refracted and danced across every surface, splintering their reflections into 1,000 shifting facets. Daniel tried not to stare at the walls, which seemed to breathe with a life of their own, pulsing in time with the beating heart of the city. Sentinels watched them from alcoves, their gazes unreadable. At last they arrived before immense doors of obsidian crystal. Strange glyphs writhed across their surface, glowing faintly as Zev approached. The doors parted with a whisper, revealing the throne chamber beyond. Inside, the chamber seemed suspended between worlds. The floor shimmered with liquid light, and above, the ceiling arched into a dome of translucent crystal, the fading moons casting ghostly patterns overhead. On a dais of shifting living light sat Sovereign Naira Sky. Her electric blue fur was laced with black streaks, her sapphire eyes glowing with an inner fire. Her sleek scout armor caught and bent the chamber's radiance, shimmering with 1,000 colors. By her side stood High Advisor Kes Dalen, his staff humming with caged energy, a living current thrumming beneath his hand. Daniel approached, pulse pounding in his throat. He bowed low, just as protocol demanded, forcing himself not to look up too soon. Naira's voice, when it came, was cool and measured, carrying the weight of command and centuries of tradition. "Rise, Daniel Rowan of Terra. Convince me your world deserves to endure." Daniel straightened. The chamber was silent, every gaze fixed upon him. He could hear his own heartbeat, rapid and loud. He did the unexpected. He smiled. "Your Excellency, maybe what your realm needs isn't another conquest, but a really good story." The silence deepened, thick as velvet. Zev's hand hovered near the hilt of his weapon, electric blue fur bristling. Kess's eyes widened, disbelief etched across his face. Lila, lips barely moving, muttered a desperate prayer to any god who might be listening. Then, shattering the tension, Sovereign Naira Sky laughed, a sound crystalline and bright, ringing through the vast chamber like the first chime of spring after a long frozen winter. The courtiers stared, some with jaws parted, others frozen in mid-breath. Laughter was a thing unheard among the sovereign's kind, outlawed, extinguished generations ago. Naira pressed a hand to her throat, bioluminescent markings flickering in rhythm with her amusement. Clear the hall. Except the human. Kes protested, sputtering in a language Daniel didn't know, but Naira's gaze brooked no argument. Zev moved with military precision, ushering the guards and advisors from the room until only Daniel remained. The massive doors sealed with a resonant boom, leaving him alone with the most powerful being in the system. Naira descended from her throne, every movement a study in grace and predatory confidence, her silhouette gliding like a shadow across water. Electric blue fur shimmered, casting a faint glow on the glass floor. She circled Daniel, her long tail trailing behind her, brush tip flicking. "You are either the boldest or most foolish creature I've met," she said, voice edged with curiosity. Daniel held her gaze, refusing to shrink away. "Your laugh is worth the risk." Her long ears twitched in surprise, and a subtle glow ran down her spine. "My kind bred that response out centuries ago." Daniel stepped closer, catching the luminescent shimmer that traced along her fur. He lowered his voice, earnest. "Some things can't be engineered away." She moved around him, the air tingling with her proximity. Her tail brushed his leg, a feather-light touch, sending a jolt straight to his core. Claws extended, gleaming in the shifting light, but her tone was more amused than threatening. "I should punish you for such insolence." "But you won't," Daniel said quietly, "because you're curious." Naira's eyes narrowed, measuring him. The tension between them hummed, electric and alive. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw vulnerability flicker in her gaze. Then it was gone. "You will attend me tomorrow. We will discuss Tara's fate in detail." Daniel bowed, letting his eyes linger on hers, a challenge and a promise. "As you wish, Sovereign. But I warn you, I might try to make you laugh again." Nira turned away, but he caught the ghost of a smile on her lips before she vanished into the shadows beyond the throne. When the doors reopened, Zev appeared, his posture even stiffer than before. Kes muttered darkly about tradition and calamity. Lila was waiting, eyes wide with 1,000 questions. "I can't decide if you're a genius or insane," she whispered as they walked the glimmering halls. "Why not both?" Daniel replied, grinning despite the adrenaline still burning in his veins. Making the most feared sovereign in the galaxy laugh wasn't in the manual. Neither was flirting. Lila hissed under her breath, "Are you trying to start a galactic incident?" Daniel only smiled wider, unable to help himself. "Maybe I already have." Daniel waited in a private chamber of refracted glass, rainbows flickering across the polished floor in shifting arcs and ribbons. The chamber felt like being inside a prism. Every movement sent colors rippling over his suit and skin, washing the tense lines from his face for a moment as he tried to focus on his breathing. He could hear faint notes of distant city life, muted through the living glass. A hovercraft's drone, the murmur of guards. He wondered if Lila was safe, or if Kes had already begun plotting his downfall. He forced the thought away, glancing instead at the far door. It parted without warning, soundless as a sigh. Naira entered, less formal than before, yet every bit as imposing, her electric blue fur alive with shifting patterns of black and sapphire, as if her emotions played across her skin for those attuned to read them. She wore no armor this time, only a tailored tunic cinched with a crystalline clasp, the hint of a blade at her hip. "You're early," she remarked, ears flicking as she surveyed the room and its lone occupant. Daniel's lips curled into a playful half-smile. "Eager to continue our cultural exchange," he replied, watching the way her eyes narrowed, assessing, amused. Naira's mouth quirked. "Diplomacy or mischief?" "Sometimes," Daniel said, "the best diplomacy is a little mischief." He gestured to a sunken seating alcove, crystal cushions catching the light. "Will you join me, or would you rather pace and make me nervous?" Naira slid onto a cushion, her tail curling around her legs. Daniel joined her, careful to leave a respectful space between them. Silence settled for a moment, neither awkward nor comfortable, charged, like the hush before a storm. They talked. The conversation drifted from politics, fragile alliances, the ancient wars between Naira's people and the rival Orionis conglomerate, to stories of home. Daniel told her about rainy afternoons in New Boston, the taste of salt on Terran wind, the stubbornness of humans who built cities where no one thought they could survive. Naira listened, her head tilted, eyes intent. "Your species is remarkably resilient," she observed. Her voice was softer here, stripped of the imperious tone she used before her court. "You've survived so much: plagues, wars, exile among the stars." Daniel shrugged. "We're stubborn and curious. Sometimes we're too foolish to know when to give up." He hesitated, watching the subtle ripple of her fur, the way her claws flexed and relaxed. "May I ask something personal?" Naira hesitated, one ear flattening, but then she nodded. "Ask." He looked at her, not as a sovereign, but as someone he desperately wanted to understand. "Was that really your first laugh?" The question hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Naira's fur dimmed, the blue retreating to smoky gray along her neck and shoulders. Her tail stilled, and for a heartbeat she looked younger, almost vulnerable. "It was," she admitted quietly. "I was born after the modifications became standard. Laughter, joy, even grief. My ancestors thought such things a liability." Daniel's chest tightened. He remembered stories his grandmother told about how Terrans once engineered out disease but never could touch the heart. He knelt beside Naira, their faces level. "Does it unsettle you?" "I do not fear," she answered, almost reflexively. Yet her hand, 3 fingers, tipped with gleaming claws, trembled against the cushion. Daniel reached, slow and careful, and touched her hand. "Then why is your pulse racing?" His voice was gentle, teasing but kind. She gasped, moving faster than he could track, claws at his throat, sapphire eyes burning. "You cross a line, human." He didn't flinch, heart thundering but voice steady. "Or maybe I'm the first to cross it for you." The moment stretched. Naira's breathing quickened, her claws pressed just enough to warn, not yet to harm. Daniel could feel the electric energy shimmering between them, as if the whole city paused to see what would happen next. Then, suddenly, the spell broke. A shrill alarm cleaved through the silence, echoing through the crystal walls. The rainbows fractured and flickered in panic. Naira's comm bead flared to life, Zev's voice taut with urgency. "Sovereign, hostiles in the diplomatic sector. They're targeting the humans' quarters." Naira sprang to her feet, pulling Daniel with her. "They think you're in your rooms. Kess is doing, no doubt." She moved to a section of the wall and pressed her palm to a hidden sensor. A seam appeared, revealing a narrow passage behind the crystalline wall. "This leads to my private quarters. Stay here." She urged him forward, her silhouette glowing in the passage's blue light. Daniel hesitated on the threshold. "And if I refuse to hide?" His voice was low, challenging, but not defiant. She turned, and for the first time concern flickered in her eyes, dimming the fire to a stormy blue. "They'll kill you." Her voice was rough, stripped of protocol. "You're valuable, too valuable to lose now." Daniel grinned, reckless. "They can try. Let me help." Naira studied him, her gaze sweeping over him as if seeing him for the first time. Then, impossibly, she smiled, a small, rare expression that warmed the cold fire in her eyes. She reached to a shelf and withdrew a compact shield emitter, pressing it into his palm. "Very well," she said. "Try not to die. I find I'd rather not lose you." Daniel's heart stuttered. "High praise, Sovereign." Her ears angled forward and she leaned close, her breath cool against his cheek. "Naira," she said softly. "When we're alone, call me Naira." A crash echoed somewhere close, a door forced, a weapon fired. Naira's fur shimmered in response, shifting from blue to black in a defensive pattern. Claws unsheathed, she looked every inch the predator queen. "Let's show them why they shouldn't threaten what's mine." Daniel's pulse thrummed as he activated the shield, its blue shimmer cocooning him. For a heartbeat he let himself hope that this night would end with more than survival. He met Naira's gaze, the promise of alliance, and something dangerously close to affection, passing between them. "Lead on, Naira," he said, and together they plunged into the heart of danger. After the attempted assassination, the palace was in turmoil. Guards swept through crystalline corridors, their voices tense as they relayed updates, and alarms still flickered in the vaulted ceilings like artificial lightning. Daniel nursed a shallow wound on his shoulder, just a graze, though it still stung each time he moved. Lila paced the perimeter of the guest suite, her steps sharp and anxious, her hollow slate clutched to her chest. "You fought beside the sovereign, and flirted." Lila's words were half accusation, half awe, her eyes darting to the door as if she expected more assailants to burst in at any moment. Daniel pressed a blood-stained compress to his arm and shrugged, unable to hide a crooked grin. "The flirting was accidental," he said, though the warmth in his eyes suggested otherwise. Across the chamber, through a wall of living glass, he could see Nira questioning Zev. Her fur still pulsed with adrenaline, deep blue and black streaks flickering along her arms and tail, her voice clipped, precise. Zev stood rigid, answering with military brevity, his own expression unreadable. Lila stopped, pivoted to face Daniel. "Kess's allies want your head," she hissed. "They're saying Naira's compromised. That she's letting her judgment slip, because of you." "They're right, but not how they think," Daniel replied. He watched Nira, her every gesture sharper, more alive than before. "Their society's emotional suppression is unraveling. During the fight, Naira was more than angry. She cared when I was hurt." He shook his head, almost in wonder. "These feelings aren't new, they're returning, like the thaw after a long winter." Lila's brow furrowed. "You think the suppression is breaking down?" "I think it was never meant to last," Daniel said. He tapped at Lila's holoslate, pulling up the palace's historical database. Holographic records shimmered into the air between them. Generations of official edicts, family trees, scientific reports, all interspersed with puzzling gaps and redacted lines. "See these gaps? Someone's been editing your history, Naira," he said, as the sovereign entered the room. Naira stepped inside, her posture stiff, eyes bright with the residue of violence. She dismissed Lila with a flick of her hand and a glance that brooked no argument. Lila hesitated, then swept out, door hissing shut behind her. Naira came to stand beside Daniel at the records, arms crossed, tail flicking in restless thought. "These are restricted to the royal line. Even Kess lacks full access." Her voice was low, wary. "Why are you so interested in our past?" Daniel zoomed in on the fragmented timeline, highlighting the missing decades. "Then why the gaps?" he pressed gently. "If your history is your pride, why hide parts of it?" Naira's ears angled back, her tail curling tighter. "The modifications are our greatest achievement. They allowed us to build an empire free of emotional chaos. No more wars driven by rage, no more scandals or betrayals." "Free from love?" Daniel challenged softly. He stepped closer, the hollow projection's glow painting their faces in shifting color. "What kind of progress is that?" Her jaw tensed. "We gained order. Purpose." Daniel watched her for a heartbeat, then reached out, careful not to startle her. "You're changing, Naira. Every new emotion excites and frightens you." Her fur's pattern rippled in agitation, stormy blue darkening to shadow along her neck. She tried to object, but Daniel took her hand, warm and trembling, and placed it over his heart. Stop hiding. Feel this. Tell me what it does to you. Naira stiffened, claws pricking his chest, but her eyes widened as she felt the thud of his heartbeat. The fur along her arms pulsed in time with it, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to a softer, more vulnerable glow. I sense things I cannot explain, she whispered. Her voice trembled, every syllable a struggle between pride and yearning. They're called feelings, Daniel said gently, and they're strength, not weakness. He brushed his thumb along her cheek, his touch feather light against the velvet of her fur. You don't have to face them alone. She leaned in, eyes half closed, uncertainty and longing warring on her face. What are you doing to me? Her voice was a rasp, edged with wonder and fear. Nothing you weren't always capable of. Daniel pressed his forehead to hers, feeling the hum of her energy, the heat of her breath. I'm just reminding you. Nira's grip tightened on his jacket, her claws pricking through the fabric just enough to let him know she was there, real and trembling. No counsel here, she said, breath hot against his lips. Just us. She pulled him into a fierce, desperate kiss, her fur blazing with a riot of color. Sapphire, indigo, even streaks of gold bursting like sun flares. The holoprojector, forgotten in the haze, beeped softly. A hidden file unlocked, projecting lines of ancient text across the room. Initiative Aurora, emotional suppression via genetic alteration, intended as a temporary measure. Warning, not to exceed 1 generation. Naira froze, her lips parting from Daniel's, eyes drawn inexorably to the shimmering words. This is 8 generations old. Her voice was flat, horror and realization crashing together. Daniel stepped to her side, sliding an arm around her waist for strength. Someone's been lying to your people, he said, voice steady, the weight of revelation settling in the room like a new gravity. And I think I know who. Naira's fur dimmed, her tail curling protectively around Daniel. Together they stared at the truth, the first cracks of a revolution shimmering in the air. The imperial vault sprawled below the palace, a labyrinth of crystal and memory. Each corridor shimmered with refracted light and history, the echoes of long-buried secrets pulsing beneath Daniel's boots. Naira moved ahead, her pace swift, fury sharpening her every gesture. Blue-black fur bristled along her spine, bioluminescent patterns stuttering with anger. She led Daniel through forbidden halls, ignoring the security glyphs that flared and faded at her touch. 8 generations of deceit, she hissed, her claws scraping glass so hard the sound made Daniel flinch. She stopped before a towering archive terminal and plunged her hand into the interface. Data flickered, files unfurling in 3-dimensional streams. Medical logs, genetic charts, council decrees. There, in cold text, Initiative Aurora's true purpose was laid bare. The genetic modifications, the emotional suppression that shaped her entire people, were always meant to be temporary. Daniel watched as Naira's claws trembled. Someone has renewed the modifications every decade, she said, voice shaking. Kess's faction. They've done this again and again, condemning us to numbness. Daniel's mind reeled. Why? He demanded, even as dread began to coil in his gut. Before Naira could answer, a klaxon wailed through the vault, shrill and insistent. The vault's ambient glow turned blood red. Daniel's skin prickled as the temperature dropped, his breath turned to mist. Crystal spikes thrust from the floor and ceiling, inching closer with every second. Naira's eyes flashed with horror. She tapped her comm bead, accessing the palace systems, fingers dancing across ghostly keys. Kess knows we're here, she said, her voice tight with disbelief and fury. He's triggered the palace defenses. Shards of living crystal slithered across their path, closing off corridors, forcing them to run. Daniel ducked a razor-edged spike as Naira yanked him forward, her knowledge of the palace guiding them through the maze. Light fractured in wild patterns as security systems herded them inexorably upward. It's a trap, Naira warned, panting as they took a sharp turn. He'll want witnesses, The council will be there. He'll want to make an example of us. Daniel's jaw set. Let him expose himself. Your people deserve the truth. If they see it all, they'll have to choose. They burst through the last barrier, emerging into the throne room, a vast cathedral of light and shadow. The council stood arrayed before the throne, their eyes cold and expectant. Every guard, every advisor, every rival was present. At the center, High Advisor Kess stood in regal defiance, his staff crackling with suppressed power. Kess's voice boomed across the chamber, cold and triumphant. The human has corrupted our sovereign. She has forsaken the laws that kept our empire strong. She has succumbed to dangerous passions. The only corruption is yours, Kess, Nira answered, her voice ringing with emotion, her fur flaring in wild, vibrant patterns. Generations of manipulation. You have made us less than what we were meant to be. Kess sneered, gesturing for the guards to close in. She speaks with emotion. The human's influence has tainted her. This is proof our safeguards are necessary. Daniel stepped forward, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. He forced himself to project calm, even as adrenaline surged. Or she's finally free, he challenged. Tell them about Initiative Aurora, Kess. Tell them why the Sovereign, why any of you, are not allowed to feel. Kess flicked a dismissive hand. That is ancient history. An experiment, nothing more. The modifications were necessary for stability. Naira strode to the center of the room, her presence undeniable. No, she said, projecting the vault's files into the air for all to see. The modifications were meant to last months, not centuries. Every decade, your factions secretly renewed them. You have stolen joy and love and choice from our people for your own control. The council murmured in shock, shifting uneasily. Guards faltered, weapons wavering as the truth bled into the open. Zev stepped forward, eyes locked on Nira. I serve the Sovereign, Zev said, voice steady. Not you. He turned and faced Kess, weapon lowered in silent judgment. Nira addressed the council, her voice rich with feeling. We were never meant to live like this. Feeling doesn't make us weak. It makes us whole. The strength of our ancestors was not their emptiness. It was their passion, their loyalty, their love. A hush fell over the chamber. Kess, desperate, bared his teeth. You would undo centuries of order for a fleeting infatuation with a human? You doom us all. He drew a weapon, crystal barrel gleaming with blue fire. Nira's eyes widened. Daniel saw the threat a split second before the shot fired. He threw himself between Nira and the blast, the shield emitter flaring to life. The energy crackled against the invisible field, singing Daniel's nerves with static. The guards, shocked from their stupor, surged forward and seized Kess, wrenching the weapon from his grasp as he screamed and fought. The room shook with emotion, anger, relief, hope, all awakened and raw. Daniel staggered back, his breath ragged, but Nira caught him, wrapping her arms around him and drawing him close. He felt her trembling, not with fear, but with the force of everything she had been denied. You risked your life again, she whispered, voice fierce and trembling. It's becoming a habit, Daniel said, brushing her fur gently from her face, his fingers lingering where the color blazed brightest. Nira kissed him before the council, her fur radiant with unrestrained emotion, bioluminescence shifting in vibrant waves. The council watched, silenced by the force of her declaration. She drew him close, their foreheads touching as the world shifted around them. You've started a revolution, she whispered, voice soft and awed. Daniel smiled, his eyes never leaving hers. Worth it, just to see you smile. Days of upheaval followed. The empire reeled as the truth spread from palace halls to city streets, then out into the starlit systems beyond Lysara. Everywhere, old certainties shattered. Some worlds demanded an immediate end to the genetic modifications, their citizens filling the plazas with raised voices and unaccustomed tears. Others clung to tradition, their leaders warning of chaos and pleading for caution. News feeds blazed with images, Lyceran scientists debating, counselors resigning, families embracing with emotions they had not felt in generations. Naira stood at her window, high above the tumult. From here, the city looked like a sea of restless light, crowds gathering beneath the glass towers, the air thick with hope and fear. Her fur rippled with shifting color, a silent testament to the storm inside her. Daniel joined her, his reflection beside hers in the living glass. "They're afraid," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "So am I. After centuries of logic, emotion feels like falling into open sky." Daniel slid his arms around her from behind, warmth and steady presence grounding her. She sighed, her tail curling instinctively around his waist. He pressed his lips to her ear, voice low and gentle. "You're not falling. You're learning to fly." She turned, pressing her face to his chest, drawing comfort from the solid thump of his Terran heart. "The renewal is in 2 days," she said, words muffled by his shirt. "Without the modifications, changes will begin. Some will embrace it. Others—" Her voice faltered. "I worry for my people, Daniel. What if they turn on me? On themselves?" He stroked her fur, voice calm and sure. "Then you'll lead them. Not as a perfect sovereign, but as someone who knows what it's like to be scared. And to hope anyway." A sudden explosion shattered the fragile peace. The floor shuddered beneath their feet, crystal light fixtures swaying. An alarm blared, harsh and insistent. Zev's voice came over the comm, clipped and urgent. "Sovereign, Kess's followers have taken the medical archives. They have hostages, including Advisor Rena's child." Naira's fur bristled with fury, the patterns on her skin flaring crimson and gold. "They want to force us to keep the modifications," she growled, claws flexing. Daniel's mind raced. He pictured the archives, its fortified walls, the narrow maintenance shafts threading through the infrastructure. "They'll expect you to negotiate," he said. "But those vents, they're too small for most Lysarans. But not for me." Lila burst into the chamber, breathless and alarmed. "You can't! If they catch you, you'll be a hostage too." "We have no margin for error." Daniel shot her a lopsided grin. "I'm whatever Terra needs me to be." He winked at Naira, mischief shining in his eyes. "Besides, I'm getting good at rescues." Naira caught his arm, squeezing tight. Fear and pride warred in her gaze. "If they catch you—" Daniel squeezed her hand in return. "You'll make sure they're distracted." He leaned in, brushing his lips against hers. "Trust me." She yanked him into a fierce kiss, her claws curling in his jacket. "Survive, and I'll show you what new feelings I've found," she promised, her voice a growl that sent a thrill down his spine. Daniel slipped away, Lila pressing a miniature comm unit into his palm, her expression equal parts admiration and exasperation. He flashed her a reassuring smile before vanishing into the labyrinth of service corridors. Inside the shafts, darkness closed around him, lit only by the pale blue glow of his shield emitter. The walls pressed close, barely enough room to crawl. Every clang of distant weaponry sent echoes down the tunnel, reminding him how fragile his advantage was. He paused at a vent, peering down into the main archive hall. Below, hostages knelt in a tight circle, their eyes wide, fear making their fur ripple with confused color. Armed rebels, Kessa's loyalists, stood guard, nervously checking the entranceways. At the center, Advisor Rena's child, a small girl with bright sapphire eyes, clung to her mother. Daniel waited, heart thundering, until the planned distraction unfolded. At the far entrance, the grand doors burst open. Naira swept in, flanked by Zev and a squad of guards. She looked every inch the sovereign, tall, radiant, her fur blazing with righteous anger. "You want to threaten my people's future?" Naira's voice rang out, unyielding. You will answer to me. The rebels braced themselves, weapons trained on the hostages. Daniel knew this was the moment, before they could react. He slid the vent aside and dropped silently behind the hostages, shield emitter glowing. He whispered, "Stay close," then pressed the shield's activation. A shimmering barrier flared, encasing the hostages. The rebels spun, momentarily distracted. Zev and Nira's guards surged forward, weapons raised. The battle erupted. Energy bolts seared the air, crystals splintered under claws and kinetic blasts. Daniel scooped Rena's child into his arms, shepherding the others toward the rear exit, shield humming as it absorbed stray fire. Naira was a force of nature. Her claws flashed, her movements a dance of fury and grace. The rebels, unprepared for her wrath and the sudden loss of their leverage, broke ranks. Zev's team secured the last of the hostages, while Daniel led the child to safety, heart pounding with relief as he emerged into the corridor beyond. Rena rushed to them, gathering her child in a shaking embrace. She bowed deeply to Daniel, gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you. These feelings, this fear, this hope, are our strength. Others echoed her, voices trembling but resolute. The dam had broken. The crowd pressed forward, guards and citizens alike, their faces awash with tears and laughter. Naira found Daniel, her fur glowing with relief and overwhelming affection. She pressed her hand to his cheek, fingers gentle as moonlight. You risk everything for us, she whispered. He smiled, brushing his thumb along her jaw. I said I was getting good at rescues. Her lips curved in a radiant smile, then she turned to address the gathered crowd. The archives, once a place of sterile silence, now buzzed with new life. The renewal is near, Naira declared, her voice carrying to every corner. Those who wish to keep the modifications may choose, but I choose freedom, I choose love. The crowd erupted, not just in applause, but in a flood of real, raw emotion. People wept openly, others embraced, and a ripple of laughter passed through the archives. Daniel pulled Nira close, holding her as if nothing else in the galaxy mattered. Still think making you laugh was worth it? He murmured. Naira's eyes glimmered with unshed tears, and something fiercer, something entirely new. She pressed her forehead to his, her voice a tremulous whisper. Worth everything. On the eve of the renewal, Daniel stood on Naira's balcony, the chill night air tinged with the metallic scent of distant rain. The city below pulsed with anticipation. Above, the sky glittered with approaching starships, their engines like silent comets arcing toward the heart of Nova Lissara. Daniel's hands gripped the rail as he watched the parade of vessels, transports and dreadnoughts, their hulls emblazoned with the insignia of allied worlds. The future of an empire gathered at the sovereign's door. Lila's footsteps echoed on the polished crystal. She stopped beside Daniel, hollow slate in hand, her face drawn but resolute. 3 admirals have pledged support to the sovereign, she reported quietly. Their fleets arrived an hour ago. Zev says morale is holding, barely. She hesitated, lips pressed thin. But Kess escaped. He released the Initiative Aurora files to every world. The whole truth. Some died when the modifications ended. Their bodies couldn't handle the return of emotion. Daniel's heart lurched. He turned from the window, the city's glow reflected in his eyes. How many? We don't know yet. Medical teams are doing what they can, but... Lila shook her head, unable to finish. Daniel left her, urgency propelling him through marble corridors. He found Naira in her study, standing rigid beside a bank of darkened screens. Her fur, once radiant, now glimmered dully. She did not look up as he entered, but he saw the tension in the set of her shoulders, the ache behind her eyes. The renewal is in 12 hours, she whispered, barely audible. Those who want the modifications can have them, but some might not survive the transition. My people could shatter in my hands. Daniel crossed the room and drew her into his arms. For a moment she resisted, pride warring with grief. Then she melted against him, her tail winding tight around his waist. "Let me help," he said. "You're not alone. Not anymore." Before she could reply, alarms blared, a wail that shook the walls and sent pulses of red light chasing through the palace. Zev's voice crackled over the comm. "Sovereign, Kess's forces have breached the lower vaults. They're attacking the renewal chamber. They've planted charges aiming to destroy the genetic archives." Naira broke from Daniel's arms, her fur flaring with sudden raw power. They ran together, their footsteps pounding through hallways as guards streamed past, weapons drawn. At a junction, Zev fell in beside them, his eyes wild. "We've secured most passages, but the only way into the chamber itself is through the upper maintenance shafts," Zev panted. "The rest are sealed tight." Naira turned to Daniel, desperation and command flickering in her gaze. "I won't risk you again. The shafts—" "But you'll risk everything else?" Daniel interrupted, reaching to cradle her face. "Let me prove love isn't weakness. Let me finish what we started." She stared at him, breath shuddering, then seized him in a fierce kiss. "If you die, I'll never forgive you," she growled. "Then I'd better not." Daniel smiled, heart pounding with reckless hope. Naira unclasped a pendant from her throat, a teardrop of glowing crystal, swirling with blue fire. She pressed it into his palm, her hand lingering. "Return to me," she whispered. "That's an order." Daniel nodded and sprinted away, the pendant pulsing warmth against his skin. He dropped into the crawl space, the walls barely wider than his shoulders. The journey was a blur of shadows, clanging metal, and the muffled thunder of battle somewhere above. He reached the renewal chamber's access grate and peered down. The vast room was awash in emergency lighting, the genetic archives arrayed in crystalline pillars that stretched toward the domed ceiling. Kess moved among them, flanked by loyalists. Explosives glinted at the base of each archive. Kess's hands danced over a control pad, sweat beading on his brow. Naira's assault team crashed against the far doors, drawing shouts and weapons fire from Kess's guards. It was the distraction Daniel needed. He slipped down from the vent, shield emitter raised, and hit the ground in a roll. Kess spun, eyes wild. "You!" he spat. Daniel didn't answer. He sprinted for the central console, weaving through columns as weapons fire ricocheted. The shield shimmered around him, deflecting blasts as he dodged falling debris and leapt over a fallen guard. Kess, desperate, lunged for the detonator. Daniel slammed the pendant into the control panel. For an instant, nothing happened. Then ancient systems stirred, recognizing Naira's authority encoded in the crystal. Runes flared to life, blue energy racing through the room as the archives absorbed the shock of Kess's detonators. The explosion was muffled, contained, a brilliant flash of light, then silence. Kess staggered back, horror twisting his features. His loyalists dropped their weapons as Naira, Zev, and the guards stormed in. Daniel turned to face Kess, panting, blood running down his arm from a fresh graze. Kess's voice was hoarse, defeated. "How? How did you stop me?" Daniel knelt beside him, voice gentle but unyielding. "Because she chose. She chose to feel, to trust, to love. That's stronger than any program you forced on your people." Naira entered, her fur radiant, no longer just with anger or fear, but with hope. She moved to Daniel's side, pulling him to his feet, her eyes luminous with pride. She faced her people, her council, her enemies and friends alike. "Now we remember how to stand together," she declared, voice ringing through the renewal chamber. "To feel together, to laugh together. Tomorrow you will choose. Some will keep the modifications if that is their wish. But I choose freedom. I choose love." The archives pulsed with light, the knowledge of generations preserved. The crowd, guards, scientists, citizens, stood stunned, the future suddenly wide open. Daniel took Naira's hand, threading his fingers through hers. As they walked from the chamber, he felt the weight of history shift, the beginning of something new. Love, once awakened, could never be erased. A month later, the palace was alive with celebration. Banners fluttered from the spires, and music drifted through sunlit halls. Daniel stood before a mirror in formal robes, heart hammering as Lila fussed with the collar. Most of the Empire chose freedom, she said, unable to hide her smile. Even Kess, he's in rehabilitation, and Zev reports he's begun to feel again. You changed everything. Daniel grinned, nerves and happiness mingling in his blood. We all did. Zev entered, resplendent in ceremonial armor. It's time, Daniel. The sovereign awaits. The grand hall was a living ocean of color, thousands of Lysarans and allies, their fur and robes aglow with emotion. Daniel walked the aisle, Zev at his side, the world watching. Then Naira entered, every step a poem. Her fur was a living display of feeling, waves of sapphire, indigo, and gold shifting with every breath. When she reached Daniel, their hands met, energy crackling between them. They exchanged vows, promising to love until the moons faded from the sky. When they kissed, the hall erupted in joy, cheers, laughter, tears. All around them, barriers fell and history remade itself in a single embrace. Later, as they danced beneath a ceiling of crystal and starlight, Naira pressed her cheek to Daniel's. Are you ready for what comes next? She whispered, her voice trembling with excitement and uncertainty. Daniel touched her face, eyes shining. Nothing worth doing is ever easy. But we'll face it together, one laugh at a time. Above them, the twin moons rose over a new empire, one built on the strength of both reason and love. Naira pressed her forehead to his, the old Lysaran gesture now infused with new meaning. I love you, she said, her voice fierce and full. Daniel smiled, heart overflowing. I know. I can see it in your fur. She laughed, a sound that changed a civilization, and kissed him, promising a future of wonder and joy. Our story ends here. If you'd like to support us, you can use the Super Thanks button right under the video to leave a tip. It truly helps our team improve the quality of our work. We're grateful to each and every subscriber for being with us. Make sure you subscribe, press the like button, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most in this video. Your feedback means a lot to our team. You'll discover many more captivating stories on our channel. See you in the next one.